Hi everyone. Today's topic is physiology of language and speech. Language and speech are the unique and fundamental to the human civilization. It enables us to understand and communicate in the form of speech and writing. Of course, we can express without speech in the form of body language and expressive language. So it is not limited to the expression only through speech and writing. However, it can be said that language is the means of communicating one's thought through spoken words or in writing, and is also the medium for all the interpersonal connections or the transactions. It is more complex to understand the mechanism of speech. Whatever the present knowledge we have is based on the clinical data by analyzing the patients who were affected with the aphasia due to the cerebral damage. Let us discuss the topic under the following headings: Introduction, Functional Anatomy, Mechanism of Speech, Cerebral Dominance, Applied Physiology, and Summary. Let us see the components of sound based language. So, phonemes, it is the fundamental sound. Morphemes, it is the smallest meaningful word. Lexicon, it is a collection of words. Syntax is the linking of words using the rules of the grammar. Semantic, which gives the meaning to the words. Discourse is the linking of the sentences. Prosody is the rise and fall of the pitch, which modifies the meaning of the sentences. Cortical areas. Let us discuss important cortical areas. This is the motor area, so which controls all the movements, the major movements, and this is the sensory area. So the somatosensory area receives the sensation from all over the body. Here the occipital cortex, it controls the vision, it receives and interprets the vision, and the temporal area receives the auditory signals, the sensation of hearing, so it receives and it interprets the auditory information from outside, and the frontal area and the prefrontal areas. So the frontal area has the control over the thought and the movement of the eyes. So the thinking part comes from the frontal and prefrontal association area. Language areas. So there are Let us see how the prompting is done when they repeat a word. So the understanding of the spoken speech is done first. That is, they hear the spoken words which is received in the primary motor cortex, that is the 41 Broca's area 41 and 42. Then it moves to the secondary auditory area, that is 21 and 22. There happens a recognition and understanding of the spoken words, and then interpretation and comprehension of the speech area happens in the vernix area, this is Broca's area 22. And expression in the form of spoken speech, it moves on to the Broca's area through the articulate fasciculus. The Broca's area for the motor speech is 44. From there it moves on to the motor cortex area 4. So there the process for the vocalization happens. And then reading, how they see and they read. So understanding of the return speech happens in the primary visual cortex. They perceive the return words, and the interpretation happens in the secondary visual area 18 and 19. And then generation of thought, ideas in response to the return speech, that happens in the angular gyrus or the degenerates area, that is 39, Broca's area 39. Then it moves to the vernix area, and then it goes through the articulate fasciculus to the Broca's area 44, and from there it goes for the vocalization to the motor cortex 4. This is how they read. And then copying, so understanding of return speech, so perception of return words, that happens in the primary visual cortex area 17, and then interpretation happens in the secondary visual cortex area 18 and 19, and then generation of thoughts, ideas in response to the return speech happens in the angular gyrus 39, and then expression in the form of return speech, that goes to the externus area. So that is the after, so from 39 angular gyrus to it moves to the vernix area. From there through the articulate fasciculus it moves to the Broca's area. From the Broca's area it goes to the externus area. So externus area, it is the motor writing center. So it is in the middle of the frontal gyrus in the dominant hemisphere. So it is in the premotor cortex. It processes the information to area 4, which is appropriate movement for the hands and fingers. So that is the return speech. Phonation. Phonation is a process by which the vocal cord produce certain sound through the periodic vibration. Here you can see, so the muscles involved and the ligament involved, and how the thyroid cartilage is involved in different forms of the sound. So where the energy comes for the phonation, how it happens, so how the vocal cord vibrates, how it happens. So the production of sound happens when only the expiration happens. So the energy comes from the expiratory sound, expiratory air. So from that is where the sound is produced. Here you can see how the vocal cord behaves when there is a forced respiration, when there is whispering. So here you can see the abducted vocal cord for the phonation. So it is only there is a slight gap, and here it is abducted, which is for the quiet respiration. Finally, we have the act of articulation, so which means the muscle movement of the mouth, tongue, larynx, vocal cords, and that is responsible for the intonations, timing, and rapid changes in the intensities of the sounds. The facial and the laryngeal regions of the motor cortex, they activate all these muscles. A modification of the sound happens in these areas, and resonant sound, for that the most important regions is the nasal cavity and the sinuses around it. Cerebral dominance. Why the left hemisphere dominance is there for the speech, the specialized, which is specialized for the sequences of events. So right is better at the spatial items all present at the same time. So right also involved in doing a narration, when choosing what will come next, recognition in emotion in speech, and rhythm of the speech. Now look at where all the important areas for speech is. The motor control of mouth and lips are at the bottom of the cerebral hemisphere. So next to Broca's area, which produces speech, and it is also close to the primary cortex, primary auditory cortex, which is necessary to hear both yourself what you speak and others how they speak. So this area right next to the vernix area, which is important for understanding the speech. Angular gyrus is necessary for reading the visual communication, which is visual, which is associated with the visual image of the sounds of the word. Representational hemisphere, so it receives the signal. So mostly they, when that is visual spatial relationship, like navigation when it happens, and imagination, all the visual things. So 90% it is left hemisphere is categorical, that is dominant. So in that 70% of the left-handed have left hemisphere dominance. Concept of categorical and representational hemisphere. Functions allotted to left hemisphere in right-handed persons. So right hand control will be much better. Spoken language is stored in the dominant hemisphere, that is the left hemisphere. Then written language is here, and mathematical skills, scientific skills, and reasoning, everything is there associated with the left hemisphere. And functions allotted to right hemisphere in right-handed person, that is they'll be having left hand control, and they'll be having more music awareness, the three-dimensional awareness will be much better, art awareness will be interested in in drawing, and they will be having better insight and better imagination. It is now very clear that both the hemisphere have some function. So there is no more dominant hemisphere and non-dominant hemisphere, because the non-dominant hemisphere also has some function. That is why now they call it as categorical hemisphere, which is concerned with the sequential analytical processes. So which includes speech, understanding the language, mathematical ability, so all these things. And whereas the other hemisphere is called as the representational hemisphere, which is concerned with the visual spatial relations, so the musical ability, stereognosis, recognition of various things, all these things are concerned with the representational hemisphere. So far we have seen that there are some functional differences between the two hemisphere. But is there any anatomical difference between the two hemisphere? Yes, they have the anatomical differences. The area, which is called as the planum temporale, which is the area of the superior temporal gyrus, which is involved in the language related auditory processing, is usually larger on the left side than the right one. So that is the difference, anatomical difference between the two regions. So where the language auditory processing happens, so there it is more larger, so it is larger. So there are also some chemical differences exist between the two hemisphere. So the concentration of the dopamine is more in the on the left side in the right handed individuals. So but the concentration of dopamine is more, but the physiological significance of this chemical difference is unknown. We know that the anatomical difference, but the chemical difference is unknown. Modern framework of language. So left hemisphere is more concerned with the lexicon and syntax. Hope you remember what is lexicon. It is a collection of words. Syntax is concerned with the linking of words, so with the rules of grammar. And right hemisphere, it is more concerned with the prosody. What is prosody? It is the rise and fall of pitch, which helps to modify the meaning. And the nouns, they are more stored in the posterior temporal cortex, and verbs, they are in the frontal cortex and cerebrocerebellum. So all these nouns and verbs will not be fluent when the concerned area is damaged. Language and aging. Development of speech in a child, it occurs in two stages. In the first stage, the association of certain words with visual, tactile, auditory, and other sensation, which is happens to the kid in the external world, it is stored in the memory. First, the storage is that happens. In the second stage, in this stage, the development of speech involves the establishment of the new neuronal circuits. When a definite meaning has been attached to certain word, the pathway between the auditory area and the motor area for the muscles of articulation, which helps in the speech, is established. and now the child attempts to formulate and pronounce the words which are learned. So in the first stage it stores the words whatever it receives. Second, it develops the new neuronal circuit. Then learning new languages. So it is very interesting that in the individuals who learn a second language in the adult life, so they did a functional MRA and that relieves that the portion of the Broca's area concerned with it. So there is an adjacent area but separate area from the area which is concerned with the native language. So there are two areas. If an adult learns a new language, there are two areas found in the Broca's area for the language. One is for the native language, another one is which is learned. But in the children who learn two languages in their early life, there is only a single area for both the language. So that is why children acquire fluency in the second language more easily than the adults. So it is if if they learn two languages at their age, they can get the fluency better. Flexibility of the hemispheric assignment in children. So right at birth, the potential development of language is better in the left categorical hemisphere. So the assignment of language function to specific area is very flexible in the infant period. So when there is a damage to the left hemisphere during their childhood, so that causes only a temporary or minor language impairment. But damage during the adult life that causes permanent deficit of language. So with age, when there is an hemispheric damage, the speech becomes slow and sometimes less comprehensive. That is due to the degenerative changes in the categorical hemispheres. Methods used to study the higher function. PET scan is used to study the glucose metabolism that is proportional to the neural activity, and then functional MRA that is used to measure the local amount of oxygenated blood. So now this PET scanning and the functional MRI are the current radiological means by which the higher functions are understood. And then stimulation of the cortex of a conscious individual during neurosurgical procedures, and they evaluate the response. And then the VADA technique. For the VADA technique, they use the sodium amobarbital procedure, that is intracarotidally they inject the amobarbital sodium amobarbital and they paralyze the one of the hemisphere and they look out for the language in the memory function using the EEG electroencephalogram, and they find out which side is more dominant and whether they remember when one of the side is paralyzed, and it is quite helpful. Now PET and functional MRI is more helpful and more convenient. This is just an image of the PET scan of the left hemisphere. When they look at the words, you can see the where the function is higher. Now it is very easier and very simple to register which area is more involved in doing the things. Here you can see when they listen the words, the auditory area, and when they speak the Broca's area, when they think about it, here you can see what are the areas that are active. The prefrontal area and the vernix and the angular gyrus, you can see. This is the image of the functional MRI. Aphasia, when there is difficulty in speaking, understanding, reading, and also writing. So there are two major types of aphasia. One is the motor aphasia or Broca's aphasia, anterior expressive aphasia, or non-fluent aphasia. The another one is sensory aphasia or vernix aphasia, posterior receptive or fluent aphasia. So these are the two types of aphasia. Aphasia, it is the inability to understand the spoken or written speech, or inability in expressing the spoken or written speech. You have to make sure that there is no mental confusion. So as we have discussed, there are two important types of aphasia. One is sensory aphasia, another one is the motor aphasia. So let us see what are all the other types of aphasia depending on the site of lesion. So the first one is the pure word blindness. It is the inability to recognize the meaning of the written or printed words. So the patient will be unable to read or copy it into writing. So otherwise your speech is not disturbed. So when there is um, the connection between the visual cortex and the arcuate gyrus is damaged. So this happens, pure word blindness. And then anomic aphasia, it is the inability to find an appropriate word to express a thought. So usually here the naming the object will be lost. They will not, they know what it is, but they don't know what is if you show the apple, they know what it is, but they will not say that that is an apple. So that is, they will forget the name of an object. And then sensory aphasia. So here it is also called as the fluent aphasia, because here the motor speech is intact. The patients, they talk very fluently, so they exclusively they talk. So it is called as fluent aphasia. Neologism, so that is using or creating a new word or meaning for the established word. So that is neologism. And paraphasias, that is production of unintended words or phrases during the effort of speak. So and there will be impairment in the reading and writing. So in the sensory aphasia, we know that the vernix area gets affected, so which comprehends and interprets the information whatever it receives. So that is affected completely. And then pure word deafness. So they cannot hear the word properly here, as the auditory cortex is damaged. That is the pure word deafness. And then conduction aphasia, when there is a damage to the arcuate fasciculus, here the repetition of a given word will not happen. And then the Motor aphasia, when there is a damage to the Broca's area, they are non-fluent just because the motor area is affected. So there will be good comprehension, but there will be difficulty in expressing them. So it will be, they will be having different difficulty in speaking, the articulation, and also in the writing part, agraphia. In pure word mutism, so when there is a lesion in the motor area where the commands comes for the expression of the tongue, the vocal cord, all these things, they will not be, they can comprehend the, in Broca's area is fine, but they will not be able to express. So the muscles for the articulation and the vocalization will not happen. So that is the pure motor mutism. So here it cuts off the speech area from the extramotor cortex. And then finally the global aphasia, that is when both the vernix area and the Broca's area gets damaged. So let us see, can you find out which type of aphasia is given here? So can you assume? I'll give you 5 seconds. So this is anomic aphasia. She is finding it difficult to name the orange. And can you say which type of aphasia that this could be? This is the Broca's type of aphasia. Here you can see the damage to the Broca's model. So this is the Mr. Broca. He found out the affected area. It is the same brain. In summary, here you can see the individual receives the signal from the external through the eyes. It is received in the primary visual cortex and it moves to the secondary visual cortex, and the visual information is sent to the angular gyrus, and from there, so the interpretation and the comprehension is done in the vernix area. From there, through the arcuate fasciculus, it reaches the Broca's area. From Broca's area is come to the motor area 4, from where the signal is sent to the vocal cord and the phonatory muscles, from where the word is uttered. If here you can see the lateral sulcus or sylvian fissure where the language areas are lying around. So if it is a heard word, then they listen the word heard through the ears, and that comes to the primary auditory area, from there to the secondary auditory area, from there to the vernix area, and then through the arcuate fasciculus it reaches the Broca's area, and then from Broca's area it goes to the Broca's area, motor area 4, and then the speech is attained. If they are going to write, if that is going to be a return speech, and then that is from the Broca's area it goes to the externus area, which is in the motor area, and then the fine movements of the fingers helps to write. And the books to read: A.K. Jain, Hindu Purana, Guyton and Hall, Genong, and the G.K. Pal. Thank you for your patient listening.